And for this next talk, I'd like to bring on Jason from Story to tell you about how we can put IP on chain. So without further ado, please give Jason a big round of applause.
All right. Hey, everyone. It's an honor to be here in San Francisco. This is, I think, funnily enough, the first time I've actually said anything about Story in SF. I spent a lot of time in Korea and Brussels, but it's great to be back here in my hometown and just share a little bit more about what Story is doing. But really what's more important to me today is, we're all here as developers in the Ethereum and broadly in the blockchain ecosystem. So not just talking about Story today, but really I want to focus on problems that I think blockchain is uniquely fit to solve. And the one that I think about day to day and that we all think about at Story is the big problem of IP in the age of AI. So I'll really try to focus a lot on that, and then of course I'll share Story's solution and Story's attempt at solving this problem, but I think there are going to be many different solutions that blockchain can provide. So before I talk more about Story and about the IP problem, I want to first talk about what intellectual property is. I think this is a term that feels very opaque and at times boring or scary to people. And typically when we think of IP, people think about Billboard songs or they think about Hollywood films, and that is certainly IP, that's certainly content. But IP, especially with AI, is much broader than the simple things that you see on Hollywood or just the songs. It's a much broader category that includes your name, your image, your likeness. It includes software and AI models themselves. It can include your unique artistic style or your voice. So IP is much broader than just entertainment. And IP actually constitutes a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. So it is something that touches every one of our lives. And what Story is trying to do is to create an internet-scale IP LegoLand. And I'll go a little bit more into what that means, but the basic idea of Story is that every single piece of content on the internet should be an IP Lego that can plug in across different applications with the terms of the IP owner set and enforced by software. And the reason why this is important, why we want to build this IP LegoLand at all, it's because IP as an asset class, like I said before, it's a multi-trillion-dollar asset class, but it's extremely siloed. So every one of us interacts with IP. We create content, we produce content with AI, all of us can create. But at the end of the day, unless you have a legal team of 100 lawyers and you're doing deals with other studios or other institutions that have 10 to 100 lawyers, you actually don't get to access any of the upside of IP. And so if you think about IP as sort of a marketplace for trust, a marketplace for media assets, very, very few people, probably just the 0.1%, the top 0.1%, actually get to participate in this market. And the remaining 99% of us are left out. And this is because there's so much friction in order to leverage and access and license IP. So this is what we're trying to solve. And ultimately, the solution is quite simple at a high level, which is take every single piece of content that you see on the internet, an image on Instagram or a video on TikTok. Right now, it's just a static file, right? You don't know who created it. It could be someone else's thing that they're reposting. You don't know if you want to use it. If you love this character that you're seeing, you don't know how you can use it, what you have to pay. And even if you did, you would, again, have to get a lawyer. You'd have to go talk to this person physically, and you'd have to strike a deal, which is prohibitively expensive, extremely high friction, and extremely opaque. So what Story is trying to do is embed all of this information, all of this importance context into software so that every single piece of content on the internet has the information around who can license it, how much, what are the royalties, and other important data right in the IP itself. And so this is not just a technical solution. We're not focused on just building software. Of course, that's very important. But an important part of our solution, and I think an important part of solving a lot of problems that are sticky and complex in the real world, is to connect with traditional institutions and leverage those systems. So we've actually spent almost as much time on the legal side building out a legal contract that maps one-to-one with our smart contracts. So whenever creators or IP owners set the terms on their IP, about royalties or about licensing, that's actually being mapped in a real legal contract that backs the IP. So this is something that creators can actually off-ramp from Story and take to Disney or take to Hollywood. And ultimately what this means is essentially a vision where every single piece of content on the internet has a QR code that developers, that other creators, and even AI models can essentially read through an API. So that's a little bit about Story, but like I said, I wanted to focus on the problem and the real reason why any of this matters at all, why we're building this. All of this at Story started with a single question, and that question is, why aren't we living in a digital renaissance? If you think about it, if you're an alien from Mars and you come out to observe the technology, the first couple things you'll notice, number one is that everyone on Earth, pretty much, who has internet access, can reach the entire globe, and we have distribution for free. So from your seats now, if you take a photo and it goes viral, you post it on social media, you can reach 10 million people in an hour for free. So as a creator, you have free and global distribution. Second, we now have this advent of this new technology, generative AI. I'm sure we've all heard so much about it, but you have models like Sora, OpenAI Sora, that allow anyone not just to have global distribution in their bedroom, but also to have a Hollywood studio. So now everyone in the world can not only distribute content for free to everyone else, but also you don't even need creative ability. You can generate Hollywood-level content in your bedroom. So despite this, you would imagine creators would be the most powerful, most influential, most wealthy people in the world. But despite this, there is no golden age for creativity. We're actually in a little bit of a dark ages where Hollywood is on strike for 6 months out of last year. These are some of the most sophisticated creators and institutions in the world. And people online that are trying to create for a living, they're not doing much better. And our belief is we're not going to solve this problem by building a better model, by having stronger performance or cheap or more efficient models. I spent 2 years at DeepMinds before coming and building Story, and obviously those things are happening. But I think the real gating problem, the real unlock, is actually around improving our IP system. And so just to get a little bit deeper into the problem, you're starting to see now, because everyone has access to generative AI, you're starting to see really fascinating experiments, right? So you're seeing people take Drake's voice and The Weeknd's voice and turn it into a top SoundCloud hit that goes to #1 on those charts. Or you're seeing people take their favorite IP franchises like Harry Potter and actually remix it in the style of Balenciaga or of a director like Wes Anderson, and they're getting tens of millions of views. So these are really interesting experiments, but also it's a lose-lose situation, right? If you're J.K. Rowling, someone's using your IP, you're not monetizing on the back of that. And also, if you're this super fan that spent all this time building together almost like a short film around your favorite franchise, you might get a cease and desist, and your content will get taken down. So we want to turn that lose-lose situation into a win-win situation. And also, you're starting to see this problem persist not just in the world of media. This isn't just experiments with top creators or top IPs. This is happening across some of the largest institutions in the world. As you know, OpenAI was sued by the New York Times for regurgitating content that was behind the paywalls. So this is a persistent problem that is affecting media, that is affecting journalism, and is going to affect all different forms of IP in the future. And ultimately, I think this amounts to essentially a new Napster moment, where we have a godlike technology that is extremely powerful, and people are pushing the boundaries of it, but we have no way how we can monetize this sustainably and make this something that's a plus for creators rather than something that they have to fight against. So ultimately, I think what will happen if we continue down the status quo, if we just continue down this path, AI keeps on getting better, and we don't have a new IP system underneath it, I think we're going to see basically a tragedy of the commons. And if you can think about the internet as this wide grassy field, and the Yelps and the Reddits and the user-generated content constitutes the grass, right, that we're all benefiting from. But these AI models are essentially training on all of this data, all of this IP, and not putting anything back, right? So you have the situation where everyone is taking and taking and taking, but there are no new incentives as a creator to continue to contribute to this common pool of content, which makes the internet so special. And just to dive into a very specific example, imagine that you're a travel blogger, right? In the Web 2 era, which was just a couple years ago, you would probably post a travel blog, maybe your favorite restaurants in San Francisco, and that would go on a blog. And in the old social contract of the web, you would basically strike an implicit deal with Google, where if you got enough views, you could run some ads on your blog and maybe make a little bit of revenue. And this wasn't a perfect model, but it worked for many, many people. Fast forward to today, now if you're writing the travel blog on your 10 favorite restaurants in San Francisco, what's happening is Perplexity is scraping that information, and if someone has that question, they're going to go to Perplexity, and they're going to get a watered-down, summarized version of your content for free, and no one's even going to know that you wrote the travel blog at all. So what's going to happen is that if you're writing the travel blog, you're doing it probably not even for money. You're probably doing it for views and to build a community and to have your work impact people. And now that's not happening at all because no one's even visiting your work. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to stop writing that blog. And this isn't just an isolated example of a single travel blogger. This is a phenomenon that's going to happen all around the web, and that's going to lead to the tragedy of commons that I was just talking about. So ultimately, I think we're basically at a tipping point when it comes to the intersection of AI and IP, where AI right now is basically causing this tragedy of the commons, and it's causing this lose-lose adversarial situation between creators and their communities and people using AI. But I also believe, and we believe at Story, that we can actually use AI as a force for good. It can be a force multiplier. It can help creators monetize. The question is, how do we how do we choose a different path, and how do we go away from this tragedy of the common situation that we're hurtling towards? Ultimately, I think that the real problem here is that we're trying to take basically a printing press era set of copyright laws, this pen and paper legal system invented hundreds of years ago, and we're slapping it onto these godlike technologies of generative AI and of social media. And of course, that's not working. Of course, we're seeing the cracks at the edges. What Story is trying to do is to update the IP system so that it's not based on armies and hordes of lawyers, mountains of legal paperwork, but rather based on a software-based system that can scale at the speed and the scale of the internet. So what essentially we think at Story is that blockchains will be the fabric that will constitute the next generation of IP infrastructure. So how does this work, and how does this address some of the problems I just mentioned? Number one, it's about playing defense. It's about protecting creators from AI. And so on Story, one of the options is that creators, again, can set the terms, can program their IP and the rights around that, and they can choose to opt out of AI training. But what's more important than just playing defense, and what I'm much more excited about, is playing offense, right? It's not just about how do we opt out, how do you stay off my lawn. It's about actually how can we lean into AI? How can we turn IP into a network where people can build on top of it and monetize on top of it? And so ultimately what we're doing at Story is allowing people to, let's say, register their voice or their unique artistic style. And then model trainers can leverage that IP and build fine-tuned models or almost creator-owned models around it. And if that model monetizes, right? If you're Drake and your fan is training a model on your voice and they're distributing that and that becomes a hit on Spotify, maybe you can set the terms that 90% of the revenue goes back to you. So we think this is a unique opportunity for creators where they can leverage AI and Story's technology to basically build content and distribution networks that would be much bigger than if they're playing in the single-player mode. And ultimately, like I said before, we all have this Hollywood studio in our phones, in our computers, in our bedrooms. And so now the entire world can create. This is a really unique opportunity. And if the entire world can create and they can monetize around all of the internet's content in a sustainable way where they can create these win-win situations, we think that's going to be very transformational and in the future of how IP is actually developed. And this isn't just about technology. This isn't just if we have AI and if we build this blockchain-based IP system, then magically content will spawn. It's actually something that we've seen as a trend for the past 2 decades of the internet and its entire history, which is that people want to build on top of content. They want to remix content together. So the biggest social media platforms today, they're TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels. They're all based on remixing. You're seeing duets and this sort of remixing power social media. And not only that, if you look at the top 100 websites by traffic today, every year, 3 out of the top 100 are still fan fiction websites. I'm not sure if you've been on these websites. They're like Archive of Our Own. There's a few other examples. They are not very, very well-developed websites. They kind of look like they're 90s Craigslist UI, right? So they're still HTML-based websites, but still, they have billions and billions and billions of views every single year. So people love building on their favorite franchises. People love remixing. And AI and what we're doing at Story is only going to supercharge that and add the financial rails to create networks out of content. So ultimately what we want to see is a shift in the way that IP is created on the internet, away from this top-down development where you have one exec in a suit and tie in the back door of a Hollywood studio basically deciding a franchise for 10 years, and instead a type of IP development that transcends different applications, that transcends different communities, that comes from the bottoms up. And it almost looks like this graph of the Linux being developed in an open source way, except we're adding value capture built in. So if you contribute to a franchise, you can get rewarded based on the terms that were set. And to return to what we're talking about with AI, ultimately I see this as a sort of state of the world in the development of AI. We're kind of right now focused on this bottom right corner, right? And so you're seeing companies respond to this IP problem by creating massive licensing deals, right? So if you're OpenAI, you're doing a deal with Reddit for tens of millions of dollars, and Reddit is going to give you your data, and they're doing these deals one by one in a sort of unsustainable way. I think that this is, regardless of where you are on the spectrum, regardless of whether you are a Reddit user, you are the owner, the business owners of Reddit, or whether you are OpenAI itself, I think this is entirely unsustainable if you just think about the logic of these relationships. So why is OpenAI paying $10 million to Reddit? They're paying Reddit $10 million to shift eyeballs away from Reddit, the platform, and towards ChatGPT. What happens when those eyeballs start moving away from Reddit and towards OpenAI is that as a Redditor, as someone who's posting regularly on Reddit, well, you're not there to make money. You're there to get upvotes. You're there to engage with the community. And as that community shifts away from Reddit because people are all looking at the ChatGPT outputs, well, that community starts to die. So Reddit slowly loses more and more users over time because of this OpenAI deal. And then maybe 2 years in, or 3 years in, or 4 years in, OpenAI realizes, well, there's actually not that much content on Reddit anymore. And every year it's getting smaller and smaller. So the next deal might not be $10 million, it might be $5 million. And the one after that might be just $2.5 million. And then before you know it, Reddit's gone, and OpenAI doesn't have this source of data. So if you're a Redditor, you're watching your platform get sucked dry. If you're Reddit the platform, you're also watching users go away. That's literally why you're getting paid. And then for OpenAI, in the final analysis, even for these large model companies, they need a source of live IP. They need a source of live information. And that's the tragedy of the commons that's happening. So we don't think this bottom right corner is sustainable at all. We think it's sort of a local situation that we're stuck in. On the other hand, there are interesting experiments to open up AI. And you're seeing that with Meta and their Llama models. But that's only possible if you're Mark Zuckerberg and you can bankroll tens of billions in development from other revenue sources to develop open source AI without a business model. So ultimately, where Story wants to push the needle is to move into this top right corner, where you have the ability for an open internet. Anyone can upload their IP, their voice, their images, their music, and they can set the terms for how models can train upon that. And model trainers can actually take advantage of this unique IP, build models that can monetize, and have this open but value-capturing way of developing the next generation of models and also of content. So that's the future that we like to see with AI. And now I want to talk a little bit about our ecosystem. And I've talked about a lot of abstract concepts. I want to bring this down to earth and show you guys what I really mean by programmable IP and some of the visions of the future that I just shared. So at Story, we're very lucky, even though we're just starting out, to have a broad swath of ecosystem partners. We have around 50 applications already live on testnet today. But today I want to just show a few examples, just so you guys can have a concrete image of what's happening. So the first example I want to show is more of a single player mode, where you have a single app, and they're using Story's programmable IP technology to streamline UGC in licensing via AI in the single app. So it's an app called Ablo. And basically, they're a digital fashion AI remixing app that has worked with brands like Balmain and Balenciaga and Smiley, and they're continuing to work with other big brands like Polo. Essentially, what they do is they allow fans of these brands to use AI to customize merch items. So this is what's happening right now. It's a real Balenciaga, I think it's a Balmain shoe. We actually have a few copies of this one. And basically, you can imagine that, okay, you're a fan, you're creating this design, and this shoe gets published on social media after you're done. Now, let's say there's certain conditions that Ablo has set. So if you have 10,000 followers and this post of the shoe gets, let's say, 100,000 likes, then they'll actually print it. And they'll print that shoe, they'll distribute that shoe, and any revenue that comes out of that shoe gets instantly split between the original creator, as well as Ablo the platform, as well as Balmain the brand, and that all happens seamlessly via Story. The second example I want to show is actually a more multiplayer example. So instead of just having one app leverage Story almost like a single player tool, this is an example of Story evolving into a network, into that IP LegoLand I was talking about. So this is an app called Magma. They're a fully Web2 app, 2.5 million users. It's kind of like Figma, but for visual artists. Imagine you create an anime character on Magma with your friends. You can instantly register on Story with no Web3 UX. You can set the terms for how anyone else can build on top of your character, how they can license it and leverage it, and publish it to Story in a single click. The moment that IP is published on Story, every single app that's integrated with our API has access to this IP, this global pool. So imagine you're a second person. You're a creator. You don't know the first person on Magma, and you're just searching the IP hub, which is like a GitHub for IP that we built, and you want to find an anime character to use. You can find that character. You can see all the terms associated with it, and you can instantly, with one click, leverage that character and build on top of it on any other app that's integrated with Story. In this case, the second person is choosing to use Mahojin, which is a sort of AI remixing app where you can use images as prompts rather than text, and they're going to remix this character in a way that they want. So after they're done, they'll select their favorite version of that AI-generated remix, and that remix version will get instantly registered as a derivative on Story. So now we're building this global IP graph. Now, a third person who has never heard of any of these two people can be building a webcomic on Sekai, which is an AI-powered webcomic app, and they can actually find this character in the character selection screen, and they can create a webcomic around this character if they like it. And when they do, if they monetize, because Sekai has these micropayments enabled, then that revenue would flow through to every single person along the chain, starting with, of course, the person who created the comic on Sekai, flowing to the person who remixed it on Mahojin, and even to the original creator on Magma. All of this happens seamlessly without anyone having to talk to anyone else, just because these developers integrated Story's API. So ultimately, that's what we mean when we say IP LegoLand. That's a concrete example of what it feels like and looks like to have every single piece of content on the internet programmable And we think this is going to affect not just content in general, not just consumer apps like the ones I just showed you, but also the future of AI development. And it's going to empower creators to own their IP and lean into AI as a force to extend their growth in this almost open source way, as opposed to trying to defend against it and protect against it. And so that's a little bit about Story, about the IP problem and how we think blockchain can solve it. We will be here for the rest of the weekend, and we have a lot of different prizes for using different parts of Story's protocol. We're very excited about, as I mentioned, AI applications, but also what we're doing is on-ramping a $1 trillion asset class of IP on chain that people naturally understand, that people want to play around with. And so we're excited to see IPFi and DeFi applications around what we built as well. And with that, I'll wrap it up. And I appreciate all of you guys for hearing a little bit more about what we're doing over at Story. Thank you.